Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Behind the Cards. I was going to do this call last week, but didn't happen. So here we are today, and I'm really looking forward to today's class because today we're going to talk about the theme that goes over the story of the tarot. So the last time I did this live, I was talking about the story of the tarot itself. As a deck creator, you have an obligation, if you are creating a deck or crafting a deck, to tell the story of the tarot itself. And today I'm going to talk about how do we kind of lay those themes over the top. And it is a very timely call because this morning I had a deck creation client. So I'm very much in deck creation mode this morning. We were talking about this very topic that I'm going to be touching on briefly in this live. And of course, at any time you want to book a longer deck creation session with me, you absolutely can. You can go to my website, LeezaRobertson.com, and click the deck creation button, and I have an intake form there, and you can have a look at, you can fill that out and we can have a chat. So today I want to talk about how do we lay the different themes or the different myths or the different stories over the base story, which is the tarot. And here's where it gets really important. And in fact, this was one of the things that came up today on my call with my client, is that you have to remember a couple of things. One, you're telling a visual story. So the tarot is a visual story, not a narrative story. So what's the difference between that? A narrative story is a book and it has a lot of information. So a lot of tarot readers are fantasy or fiction readers. And I mean a lot of them. There's a big crossover between fiction and tarot people. And a fiction book has a story and it gives the reader a lot of information. You get a lot of information in that story. Whereas your deck, you're relying on the visuals. So the cards themselves have to be able to relay the story of the card, of the tarot, of the theme. So we're putting an awful lot of work and an awful lot of pressure on our visuals to translate to the reader what we cannot put into words. And yes, we all have guidebooks that go with our decks, and I highly recommend, if you've got a well-written guidebook, to use it. But again, most readers are going to be using their cards as cards. So we have to understand that we are telling a visual story, not a narrative story. And I jokingly said to this client of mine, I said, well, when you pick up a deck, there's no voiceover. You don't hit a button on your deck and there's a magical voiceover in your head. So when you turn the card over, you get the deck creator's input on why this image was created this way, what's happening in this image, why it's happening this way. Like, that's not happening. We pretty much have to get it off the image itself. So that's one of the things that you have to understand, is that we're telling a visual story, not a narrative story. We're going to write it as a narrative story when we design our decks, but we tell it as a visual story. And because we're telling a visual story, there are some rules that apply here. So just like if you're writing a narrative story, and I should say that if you're writing a visual story, the same rules apply as if you're writing a narrative story. So one genre, right? Don't cross genre your decks. So what do I mean by that? So for this one, it was just mermaid fantasy, right? We were dealing in mermaid fantasy and folklore. That was it. That's the genre. We stuck to it. We didn't try and put anything else in here. That's all that was in there. When I was working on it was the circus, the idea of the circus. What is a circus? What is a performance? Who's the viewer? What role do we all play in a show? That was the genre. Don't genre mix. And of course, the unicorns. We were looking at unicorn lore. We were looking at unicorn magic. We were looking at specifics to this particular world. So one genre, one world, one story, one set of rules. Okay, one set of rules. So let's talk about those two, because what influences your story once you've picked your particular theme or your particular genre is what is going to be weaved into that story. And this is where we get into our personal, as deck creators, interpretations of the lessons and the story of the tarot. So, how are we telling this story? And I'll give you a little bit of an example if I can find them here. I don't know why my decks are all messed up. But when I was doing the Mermaid Tarot, one of the things that was important here is that I also included water myths and magic. So when it came to the court cards, I wanted to make sure that there were water deities in here. And now, off the top of my head, I'm probably not going to remember them all, but I will find the one that I do remember, which was the King of Cups. And we have done a very similar thing in the Mermaid Tarot as well. Oh my God, not the King of Cups, the King of Pentacles. The King of Pentacles, and they're all based on deities, but I don't have my notes in front of me. You know, you never find a card when you're actually looking for it. Have you ever noticed that? But anyway, the King of Pentacles in this particular deck is a real river god. He's a Celtic river god, and it was important for me to have him as part of this deck because it actually led into, and of course I have Pele here too. She is a real deity. She's a Hawaiian deity. So it was important for me to weave in the actual folklore and mythology that went along with the water world for this deck. And I chose to do it through the actual court cards because the court cards themselves are people. If I remember rightly, this guy here is a Nordic god of wind. And he was in the swords. Am I actually missing this card? I cannot tell. As I said, you can never find a card when you actually want it. But the King of Coins in this deck is, oh, here he is. He's a river god. And he changed the courses of the river. And if the river wasn't flowing the right way, that means that you'd angered the god. So if you weren't getting a bounty, so like, you know, the king of coins, if the King of Coins decided you were not worthy, the river messed you up. If you did do well for this king, then he made the river flow swiftly and quickly for you. So this was a way that I kind of built out the story of my world, of my mermaid world with my water deities, and kept within the vein of the actual genre that we were in. Now, sticking to our one genre, one story, one set of rules, every theme that you have, every thematic lens that you are going to tell your tarot through is also going to have a set of rules. And your readers are so sophisticated nowadays, they're going to expect specific things in your deck. So I'm going to use Cirque as an example here. And the reason that I'm going to use this deck as an example is because if you have this deck, for the people who have this deck, they love it. For the people who didn't buy it, they weren't in love with the deck. So let's talk about why this hit a very specific market and why it didn't. Because it was incredibly niche, right? The genre on this was so pinched down and niche that the majority of the people who bought this deck did have a theatre background. And I've met a lot of people who actually can't believe I don't have a theatre background because of the heavy amount of research that went into creating the world that I told the tarot story through here, because there's a very specific set of rules for this world for theatre itself, for things that happen on the stage, on the side of the stage, behind the stage, and then the roles that we have as viewers. And, you know, one of the things that I really wanted to do with this deck was play with the idea of who's being viewed and, you know, why they're being viewed that way. Because we could say that the players on the stage can view the audience. They view that space. And then the audience also views the performers and then the performers themselves view each other from the wings. So this whole idea of where are we getting our perspective? What view are we looking at the story of the tarot from? Are we looking at it as someone who's actually participating in the story? Are we looking at it as an outsider to the story? Are we looking at it as a co-creator to the story? So because there are very specific rules set up in theater and drama and production, they had to go into the deck as well, right? So we had to put them into the deck as well. And that's why my court cards are they're set up as the one person preparing to get to the stage. So there's steps of the process from sitting in front of the mirror, putting on the makeup, putting on the costume, getting into character to getting on stage. That's the whole point of the court cards in this particular deck, is to talk about that process, the rules, the regulations, what goes on in that particular world. And we keep it contained. So one genre, one story, one set of rules. And because there is such a big crossover from fiction to tarot, as I said, our readers come in and they already kind of have this subconscious idea of what the rules of a specific world are. And you can I'm not saying you can't break some of the rules. I think you should push some of the rules. And I think that it's nice to think about where in your deck you want to break those rules and where you want to stick to them. But your whole deck can't break the rules, because then it's just misaligned with the audience to whom it's been created for. So as a deck creator, you do have to think about keeping that in mind. And in fact, the current deck that I am working on has really strict rules. So the genre that I'm working on right now has probably some of the strictest rules I've ever worked with in regards to how a story can be told and what kind of things are revealed. And this is important too when you are thinking about the fact that you're creating something visual. Okay, again, visual. What is the reader seeing and what is missing? So what's missing from the image as well? What is in the image? What is missing from the image? Now, this is the Five of Wands, and for most people, the Five of Wands tends to show, and this is where I broke the rules a little bit on this one, okay? So this is a good example of a card that I broke the rules on. Traditionally, this card is shown where all the wands are pointed in a haphazard position, because there is some form of conflict. I wanted to look at this card from a different perspective. It's still the same meaning because none of the fives actually have an outcome. There's no outcome with a five, whether it's the Five of Swords, the Five of Cups, the Five of Coins, or the Five of Wands. These are cards that make us question what direction we want to go. They're directional cards, they're decision cards, they're not action cards, they're cards of contemplation. The Five of Cups is, are you going to keep facing the past or are you going to head towards the future? You know, the Five of Pentacles is, do you want to be like everyone else and go inside the church and get all the support, or do you want to keep doing it by yourself? Like, there's a decision to be made in the five. So I wanted to show the other possible decision, right? I wanted to show the other possible decision, and that is that you could have five amazing wands and point them all in the direction you wanted to have them pointed to. It's not easy. When you have the multiplication of power by five, it's going to be intense. It's going to be difficult. It's not easy to handle. You need to kind of be strong and strategic, right? And this is one of the cards I broke the rules at. I put it in a little differently to show you a different perspective. But I kept the story, I kept the genre, and I kept it within the world of what I was creating. And it can be really difficult sometimes to remember that when you're sitting down to create a deck, because the biggest problem that I see with people who haven't created decks before is they're not thinking expansively enough. They're not thinking big enough in terms of audience, in terms of story, in terms of what the job the deck actually has. And a deck actually has a very, very big story. So If you're thinking about placing a theme over your deck, which you should be because you're in competition with the original Rider-Waite-Smith, you want to make your deck as freaking spectacular as you can. You want to tell a great story. You want to have incredible visuals. You want to make it engaging. You want to make a world that your readers are just so keen to jump into, that this is the only world they want to be a part of for the time being. So you need to think about, how do you tell those dynamics? And the book that I highly recommend for people who aren't used to moving from narrative structure story to visual structure story is actually this book here. It's called Making Comics, by Scott McCloud. I love this book. I bought this book at the very beginning of my deck creator career, and I still use it today. And the reason that I use it today, and I actually have a visual arts background, so designing, design, space, image, curation, like that is actually my academic background. I have both a graduate and postgraduate degree in fine art history, and visual literacy. So even though I have all of this education, I still use this book. I still come back to this book time and time and time again, because the stuff in this book is just so incredibly helpful, that it helps you to break down the visuals of the story that you're telling. Because remember, as I said in the first episode, we are telling the story of the tarot first. Then the theme comes on top, and we weave those stories together. We weave in the myth, the mythology, the folklore, and the story that we want to tell as the deck creator. Because, as just with this example here, we don't all see the cards the same way. The cards in tarot do not have one static meaning. I remember having a conversation with the late Rachel Pollack, and she talked about the fact that tarot people have a very specific brain chemistry. And our brain chemistry is allegorical and metaphorical. And by that, she meant that we just pick up an image and we run with it. Like, we look at something and we're automatically thinking about, how does it make us feel? What memories it brings up? How we relate to the colors, how we relate to the visuals on the card. And our brain just fires off in so many different ways that we're not all seeing the same thing. And that's true for all art, but we're not all seeing the same thing. So we're all picking up different fragments of a story. And a good deck creator can pull apart those fragments and use one or two of them each time they put a deck together, which is exactly what I do. And it's one of the reasons I always need to sit down and look at my own work first and go, okay, so how did I tell the story of this card? And do I want to tell it the same way? Do I want to come at it from a different angle? And if so, what is that angle? What is the angle I want to tell this story from? And how does it fit into the larger story of the entire 78 cards? All right. So that is a little bit on taking your base idea, adding another layer to it, and starting to weave it through. In the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can break down even more how you tell this story by the ways that you divide the deck up. I'm going to show you how I do it, and it's a system that I use again and again and again. But there's a couple, well, not lots of different ways, actually. There's probably 2 or 3 ways you can do this to make it work for you, so you don't fire your brain up the wrong way. But I'm going to show you the way that I do it, and I like it because it fits into a narrative story structure. I spend a lot of time writing narrative stories, so it's easier for my brain to click it in that way. But you can do it another way. You can do it other ways. You don't have to stick to my way. But of course, if you have any other questions, pop them in the comments below. If you are enjoying this series, this behind the scenes kind of sneak peek into how I untangle things from a deck creative perspective, again, let me know in the comments, because, if these are good, we'll keep them going for a little bit longer. But I will do one more next month. Until then, I will keep going back to my decks and working on my creation. But if you would like to have a private one-on-one deck creation session with me, by all means, let me know and we will set that up. Otherwise, happy deck creating, happy storytelling, and good luck with your deck. Bye for now.